Clean dashboards don't guarantee clean revenue. Behind every metric sits a bigger question. Can you actually trust your data? As go-to-market teams race toward AI, success no longer comes from collecting more information, but from building a true revenue truth layer that connects product, sales, and customer signals into one reliable system. Without that foundation, analytics teams have to rely on inference, and AI only scales confusion. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Revenue Lounge podcast. I'm your host, Randy Likas, and in today's episode, we will explore how modern revenue teams can move from fragmented data and reactive reporting to building true revenue intelligence. Joining me today is Uday Sharma. Uday is the head of go-to-market analytics and revenue operations at Postman. Uday has spent his entire career at the intersection of data, analytics, and revenue operations, previously helping build large-scale self-service analytics and revenue intelligence systems for companies like Cloudflare, used by thousands of sellers. Today at Postman, he's focused on connecting product-led growth with enterprise sales, building data foundations for AI-driven go-to-market, and designing analytics systems that don't just report on the business, but actively shape how revenue organizations operate and grow. Uday, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Randy. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited as well. I mentioned in the green room, ever since we did our prep call, I've just been really looking forward to having this conversation. So what I usually like to do is start by having you maybe just walk us through your background, career journey across when you were consulting to Cloudflare and now Postman. How's your role evolved from being a builder of systems to now shaping how revenue organizations should operate?
Yeah, happy to. I started my career back in 2008, almost 17 years ago. And I started in a very traditional environment where we were working with an insurance company that was my client. And I was responsible for the administration of all our data warehousing tools and reporting tools like SAP and Business Objects and Informatica. But as I engaged more with the business user over there, I tried to really figure out what problem they are trying to solve and help train a lot of end users on our tools. And that always brought me that gave me the curiosity. Okay, how do people really use these tools as well as the data sets from these reports to make decisions? And do I really want to actually get to that level at one point? Throughout my career, I was exposed to a lot of business folks, from executives to product managers to engineering leaders as well. And I always wanted to learn the other side of the story. Okay, what are people doing? How the overall end-to-end workflow really works? My recent experience at Cloudflare and prior to that, at VRBO, gave me more visibility onto go-to-market side of it, from marketing to sales to how product really operates. And I really enjoyed the overall learning experience in the last decade, and realized how powerful data can be in making certain business decisions. So let's talk about at VRBO, where we were going. It's a B2C company, different model than SaaS, but the fundamentals still remain the same. You're trying to build a brand, you're trying to get that top of funnel of the metrics, and also trying to figure out where should I invest in my marketing channel. And a lot of the clickstream tools, they give you off the bat attribution, which is quite flaky. It doesn't really give you the behind the scenes logic. It is also a black box. You don't really know why they are giving attribution to one particular channel versus another. So we started with building a data platform, ingesting all our clickstream data into our warehouse, and then partnered with our CEO as well as chief marketing officers to really come up with a strategy of, if we're investing in a lot of paid channels, do we want to actually have a restricted last touch attribution versus a last click attribution model? And since this is a B2C company, you have consumers coming in directly from your phone, from different browsers. So fingerprinting those users to tie it to every single channel that they visited and applying some logic was one of the first projects that helped me understand the overall go-to-market investment that goes in, especially in marketing side. We prepared our standard report for our CEO, which was giving a pure distribution of how many bookings are coming from every single channel, so that they can understand what's the return of investment. And when I joined Cloudflare, I continued to see Cloudflare from a B2C lens because I was a consumer of Cloudflare. I built a little bit, some small pet projects on Cloudflare. But my role in the beginning as I joined Cloudflare was an individual contributor to set up the overall data platform, get the data ingested from multiple sources to it, build like some of the frameworks to ingest this data as well. And we had a solid team. But the first project for us was to help prepare our financial KPIs to go public. And I joined in March 2019. Cloudflare went public in September 2019. Within that short window of time frame, we were not only able to stitch different data points from our multiple like billing systems that Cloudflare had migrated in the last 10 years, but also Salesforce to really tell a story to our investors that how the company has grown. I'm extremely proud of the Cloudflare S1 contribution that we had. Like there is a layer cake chart which tells like how every single cohort has grown over time. And to build that like was not that easy because the data wasn't clean. We had to stitch multiple data models from different backend systems to produce that. But after I did that, I started learning more about like our products, our product offerings, and worked more on the product analytics side to help our product managers and product leaders understand how our product is doing as a business, which was great because it made me understand a lot about like our overall landscape of products and what data is actually really useful, meaningful for our customers. But as I was doing that, I realized the huge gap between our go-to-market function and the product function, where our go-to-market function like is still trying to sell Cloudflare as a CDN company. And Cloudflare was at the pivotal moment at that 6-7 years ago, where there were so many solution areas that Cloudflare was actually investing and building the products for. But our story on the go-to-market side was not really clear. We started with like surfacing some of the usage data points to our sellers through basic dashboards after building the overall KPIs and everything. And our sellers started using those dashboards as a stopgap solution. But given like we were like it's a massive data set like that we are trying to expose. Some of these dashboards, they came up with limitations because we cannot really include more granular information that the seller may need to have to be able to understand like what context we're talking about. And it's not also useful when a customer follows up like, hey, well, how does this metric break down by a specific team or a particular account that I have? So we had SQL queries for our warehouse. People can actually run a canned SQL query and get an output. But asking a seller to learn how to write SQL query or like just even run a SQL query is calling for a disaster, because it's not their cup of tea, and they may be just given a SQL query and they'll run it. But there were cases where these SQL queries were outdated, and we ended up like sharing wrong information with the customer. So we realized that gap, and that is where we thought that okay, building something in-house to help distribute and democratize this information across our non-SQL savvy user base is the really critical thing. But it wasn't easy. We got a lot of pushback on like building this in-house with build versus buy arguments. Let's push everything to our CRM. So a lot of like great learning experiences on that, but persistently building the feature allowed me to at least build something more meaningful. And today there is a team that is actually like managing this product. It's still an in-house product, but it's actually powering at least 100,000 customers. Wow. And our more than 500 plus daily active users use it on a regular basis. And we were not really gung-ho about like our revenue attribution with how much sales is generating from it. But given all the product usage that they have and the conversations with the customers that they have, the attribution was more than $100 million per quarter easily. Incredible. And the proudest moment for me and my team was when we will go to the office and we are on the floor where all the sales reps are sitting. We'll see our product like get lit up on their screen, and then people are using actively. So that was a huge satisfactory moment for the entire team, beyond the value that we were generating for the company. As I moved to Postman, I realized that I've done both product analytics, data warehousing, laying out the entire data engineering workflows. There's not much for me to learn personally there, but I really enjoy being the bridge between the technical side of the things and the business side of the thing. That's why I really like this opportunity at Postman, where I am currently sitting at the center of our data team, the core data team that has built the overall warehouse, and they are able to run the pipelines, create these dashboards. And I'm on the business side trying to intersect between what exactly makes sense, how should we tell this story to our sellers, and even as the CRO staff, how are we executing on our go-to-market motion? Beyond that, figuring out like what are some of the levers from PLG usage, like and all other like configuration information we can use to actually tell a better story to our customers about what they really get out of our enterprise offering.
Yeah. You've been there, what, about 5 or 6 months now?
Yeah, a little over 4 months.
Yeah. So enough now to know where the bodies are buried, and you really start understanding sort of like where you can make the next level impact. So it's fantastic. One of the things that when we were doing the prep for this call, you said that before most go-to-market problems don't actually start in analytics. They start much earlier, right? With data hygiene, fragmented data living across systems. And when you walk into a revenue org with this problem, what does bad data actually look like day to day? And how does that quietly break things across go-to-market lifecycle before leaders actually notice?
Yeah, great question. I think in the modern world, like everything needs to be measured, but a few metrics need to be monitored, right? Like we are not living like in those ages where only accounting revenue matters, and that's what we care about. We have to measure all the micro interactions, whether it is like opportunity stage movement, like from one stage to another, our meeting notes that we take with our customers, and let alone the account hygiene, like do I have multiple accounts for the same customer? Or in most of the companies, like where, especially SaaS companies, it's not a one-to-one mapping between what a Salesforce account is and what your actual product account provisioning is. So do we have a right mapping between these two? And is it actually maintained? Is it automated, or is it still manually updated by people? These are like some of the foundational things that like make a huge improvement, like in our forecasting, as well as like our overall pipeline reporting. If those are fundamentally wrong, then as a workaround, a lot of people go work out of Google Sheets or spreadsheets where they just do these manual fixes, but don't really fix the core problem that is your CRM. And in my experience, I think the governance of CRM should not sit in a siloed IT team, but it should actually be part of the revenue function, like in the revenue operations. Because the people who are actually living and breathing in the tool, they need to know what changes to be made. So you can have a Salesforce administration team, but instead of having them sit under IT in an isolated manner, working off of Jira tickets that will create this field, create that object, they need to be part of the workflow so that they understand the value of it, and then they can figure out how do we ensure that there is governance in it. Because ultimately these systems are touched by humans, and it's really hard for it to get consistency out of humans.
Yeah. And so many decisions are being made off of the data. And I think when data is fundamentally wrong, not just incomplete, but wrong, it impacts so many decisions across forecasting, hiring, comp plans, so on and so forth. What do you think some of the dangers in some of those decisions, like by not having quality data or data that's not accessible, like where does that show up in terms of like risk?
I think if you're a public company, your biggest risk is your quarterly earnings, right? It doesn't really matter how much scrutiny you have in your process. There will be blind spots that will actually surprise you. And if you report your earnings wrong, then you have to go back to your investors and explain like what really happened. And I can't really go into specifics, but I've seen that in the past, like as well, where like we had to go explain like what happened because of the data hygiene issues. If you are not a public company, your internal metrics such as, what your forecast is for hiring, for investing in the right like areas, like whether it is marketing or sales, a lot can be skewed if you have bad data. And a lot of these things are sometimes not that obvious. Like they are hidden as a needle in the haystack and hard to really also debug. So we can always operate with an 80-20 accuracy, which is what most of the businesses tend towards, like knowing that their CRM data is not really clean, and it'll take probably like a few months to clean it. But I think at least there should be a follow-up after the acknowledgement that this data is not clean. and then assign ownership to right teams as well as like people to ensure that at least these foundational things are at least taken care of. The other thing that I feel is definitions, which are like, despite of having clean data, if your definitions of the metric are continuing to fluctuate and you don't really have a true versioning of it,
Yep.
then applying it to the historicals is just not really feasible. Which is why I think like having your data warehouse is more critical, because while Salesforce or other tools do provide like some reporting capabilities, they lack in terms of tracking historical changes. And
Yep.
in the go-to-market organization, like especially on the analytics side, like it's really important to snapshot every single object that is really important to you, so you can not only identify where things went wrong, but also apply the versions of like different definitions selectively to the historicals.
Yeah. Let's go back and dig in a little bit more on Cloudflare, because if I understood correctly, you went from a place of having so many sort of scattered data sources and manual exports to building that centralized warehouse, which then you build your dashboards and eventually the self-service analytics platform for your reps. What do you think were like the key turning points in that journey, and what made that system become like a real revenue driver rather than just another reporting layer?
Yeah, great question. I think there were so many learning opportunities throughout course. So we started this project during COVID in 2020, and it was just a idea, my brainchild. Like I posted on wiki page, shared it with my manager, and then like shared it with the exec sponsor. So we got an intern for summer, and one of the strongest engineers on my team, me and that intern, we started working on building a prototype. We were using BigQuery as a warehouse where we can actually just, instead of building the overall backend for the front end, we can just call BigQuery APIs and then build the front end so that it at least shows the interface to our end users, which is different than like our reporting tools, and it allows the granularity of the queries that we were trying to do. So with that prototype, within 3 months, we were able to get an application up and running and got feedback from our early users, who were mostly account executives, ADRs, or like business development representatives and customer success managers. And they're like leadership as well. We did a full-fledged rollout, like within 6 months to the entire company. And immediately it got shut down because it's too risky to have all this information at fingertips of every single employee. And that was a great learning opportunity for us, because yes, we didn't think about like governance first. We just released it like with a good intent, like this is the useful information like for our sellers. But for any company, that's the leak of data in any shape or form is a huge risk. And Cloudflare being a security company, that's one of the most important things. So we paused our development, focused more on building a better security layer for it, so that we can have who gets like proper role-based security on who gets access to what data, which customer. And then we did a relaunch in a very small group, got a security clearance on, how this whole system is going to be used and what level of details are available. It's only showing aggregated information about our customer usage, no configuration information. Therefore, we are not really risking any privacy issues as well, because if a rep is impersonating a customer to just check out what their account is doing just to sell more versus supporting a customer, that's a privacy violation, right? Like it's a big privacy violation. So we wanted to be really mindful of how we build that layer, because the easier option could be like, okay, let's not give this data to anybody and then let people figure things out as they go. But that's not the right solution, because then you are axing your own foot, where you have an opportunity to use this data to make decisions or even engage with customers in a much more targeted manner versus giving a blank like sales pitch. And customers appreciated that. In fact, like as we graduated like 6 years down the line, like this product is now, even though it's not customer facing, it is actually shown to customers through screen shares or through screenshots. And the leadership on the customer side, like they demand this. Why can't I actually have access to this product? So giving a lot of thought in building this was certainly a great learning process for the entire team. As we were building these features out, since this was like built based on a vision that we had, we also wanted to open the feature requests like for all our users. And instead of using this as a top-down requirement gathering process versus, and then like planning this as a project, we opened this bottom-up. So every single user on our platform was allowed to create like a request, a feature request. And we'll stack rank those feature requests based on the value it creates, and then share this with their leadership as well as with every single users in a much more transparent manner. And every quarter, we'll share our progress, like what features we have added. We knew it's not perfect from the day one, but as people saw recurring like improvements to this, and as we showcase the value it is creating in their day-to-day job, getting adoption was so easy. Because I still get impressed by the chat, like from the day when we started, when we had 0 users, and when we have now 1,500 plus users on a monthly basis. It is almost like running a startup within a startup. And trying to understand like what a customer really wants, how much value do they get out of this information, and are they actually getting the value or not, and then reiterating it. Towards the end, before I left, like we were also working on building a chat assistant, which can actually call our backend APIs so that our new incoming sales reps who are just getting drained out on the entire data sets, they can ask like all sorts of questions to access this information at their fingertips, in addition to some learning resources from AI. And that's where I realized, like, I think AI is going to fundamentally change the way we interact with data and the way we do our jobs on a regular basis. We don't need more dashboards in the company. We just need like a single source of truth, a semantic layer that can be queried. And most of that dashboards are just for like standard KPIs that you want to measure. And there are just a few of those, but everything else to get access to the data is happening through some analytics agent and not humans.
Yeah. And I think you reminded me of a conversation I had the other day, which is I think a lot of organizations don't necessarily even feel like they need more data. They've got plenty of data. What they need is it structured, reliable in one place so that they can build the analytics that the end users can take action on. I'm curious, just org design question. At Cloudflare, did analytics, was it a separate function? Was it embedded into the RevOps, or was RevOps a customer? And I know I'm leading us in terms of being a separate system as compared to embedded within RevOps, which is like what you're doing now. Just org design, like where did analytics sit at Cloudflare?
Yeah, I think it was part of the finance organization. Our CFO, he is a very data-driven person, and while as we were building the overall warehouse and overall data lake and the dashboards, the way we were structured was like we had every single leader within the central data team was responsible for one or multiple business functions, partnering with multiple business functions. My team was responsible for building these go-to-market analytics tools, as well as like customer analytics tools and product analytics as well. And then we also branched out into doing some network analytics as well to understand what's the ROI for our customers using our network. So in that case, like revenue operations was a customer. We were working very closely with the revenue operations function. There was an analytics team on the revenue operations side as well, which worked very closely with the core, the central data team. But as I saw that model, I believe like central data team adds a lot of value in establishing standardization, providing a platform support, monitoring all your data ingestions that are running on a nightly basis. It can be real time, it can be overnight, like in a batch. This is all of that actually is a great use case for having a central data team, and every single central data team should provide that. For larger companies like Meta, I discussed this with my peers, the way they are structured is like they have the central data team, they have organized and built like tools for all the other downstream teams to just bring in their data, write the pipelines that they need to, so that you have decentralized or given enough freedom to other downstream teams or product teams or any analytics teams to at least abide by all the standards that you have and still be flexible enough to operate at the pace that you want. Because some of the drawbacks of having central data team doing everything, which was quite common at Cloudflare, was become gatekeeper of the information. Like a lot of information is not even shared with a lot of consumers. As simple as getting some contact email address, which I already have access to Salesforce, is somehow going to be blocked in your warehouse. So those things are they don't really add any business value. They are just unnecessary friction. However, on the flip side of it, if standards are not being followed, there are also cases where there is a data breach that happens, which is where the strength of getting a solid platform done by the central data team is really valuable. At Postman, I really like what the data team has done here. They are quite lean. They have built a really amazing data platform where all the ingestions are happening at a much faster pace. It is not taking quarters to just get some data point ingested. And we are not really talking about the headcount problem. That's another thing I've seen in the centralized versus distributed teams is the centralized team is always short of headcount, and then they're asked to go talk to the business teams to fund those headcounts. So now, instead of getting the job done, the conversation is totally political, just talking about how many people do we need and who does what, and what do these people do when you don't have any ask from the go-to-market side. So I think that model needs to be done, established carefully. I think the subject matter expertise the functional team bring, that is actually much more valuable than training somebody on the centralized team to become the subject matter expert, because there is a longer learning curve there versus somebody's part of the revenue operations. They understand what the go-to-market strategy needs to be, and all they need access is to some analysis that needs to be done. They can partner very closely with the analyst on the core data team, or they can hire the analyst on their side. And if there is any data engineering work that needs to be done, you can also figure out a resourcing model between these two functions so that you have engineers sitting in one place, because it really makes a huge difference when you have a standard of hiring people versus one function is too lenient in their hiring process, another is actually too strict in hiring process, and therefore you end up with a really mixed bag of talent pool. So try to centralize wherever you need to stay consistent, and try to decentralize wherever you need to have specific tasks. That's the right engagement model. And I think at Postman, I've always been an individual contributor at heart. Even though I grew in the leadership role, I've always stayed hands-on. So I can at least read code that is written by the central team, right? And understand what's happening here, so I can have a better discussion. A lot of go-to-market functions don't really have that, including on the go-to-market analytics side. And sometimes it's just not really scalable because an engineer is explaining a lot that should be just understood by reading code. And somebody should be able to at least decipher that SQL logic, see what's happening there, and then give suggestions or improvements to the core team. But yeah, I think not all go-to-market teams are like that. I'm really happy that we are currently in that state here at Postman, so that I can focus more on the strategy side and on the impact and influencing the outcomes from this data versus just being a presenter of this data, because you can build dashboards, you can build data pipelines, and those are great. But if nobody is using them or people are not taking action on that information, then the job is only half done. And after this resource will be forgotten. All the time that you spent in building it, that's also going to be forgotten, or that's gone in vain. So the company doesn't really win, right? Organizations win when the data is actually presented to the right forum, to the right people, and then they have actually taken action from that insight.
Yeah. I think you bring up an interesting point, and I want to double click on it for a moment, which is having the analytics function embedded within the RevOps business, I think gets you closer to the strategy and how you can influence the strategy. I think how does an analytics leader need to think about their role differently in order to, I guess part of it's an org design question, but the other one is behaviorally. We got to stop thinking about building a bunch of dashboards and being a report factory to actually influencing strategy. And I just would love to give your perspective in terms of what behavioral changes maybe an analytics leader needs to make in order to have that seat at the table.
Yeah. It's something that we fundamentally considered in our hiring process, altogether. While technical skills are important, and the core technical skills are understanding how to write SQL queries, maybe use any reporting tool, doesn't really matter which one. The presentation of that data, or how are you actually like presenting that analysis, and then beyond presentation, what is the final takeaway from that chart that you have built? Like, that's the core and hiring criteria that we would look for when we were building the team, because producing a report and dashboard like now is going to be, in fact, like even much more easier than like as we have like more AI agents, like analytics agents. So I've personally tried a few, even using ChatGPT or any other tools. Like this part is already solved for, and eventually will continue to get better. So you don't want dashboard factory or a person who is just creating reports but has no idea how what this report is conveying, and how this information is going to be used by the business. They may not know the whole story, but at least like they need to be able to articulate what they've built and how the end consumer needs to use it. And as a go-to-market leader, it's also really important to filter out the noise from the signals, because while you may not know everything that you want from the beginning and you may ask for a lot, right? Ultimately, there will be few guiding metrics that you need to care about, and those are the ones that you are going to track. Everything else that is like secondary metric, it can be measured, but those are not the ones that you want to look for on a daily basis. So it's really like looking at what makes the primary metric tick is the important takeaway for a go-to-market leader, and then using that to influence the strategy on whether it is our playbooks on the sales side, our understanding our loss rate, like for opportunities, where are we losing, why are we losing, what do we need, what our customers are saying. Those are like really important things beyond just the day-to-day analytics stuff.
Yeah. I think one of the other things about being embedded in the business as opposed to outside of that is, and I think you actually mentioned this before, is this idea of connected apps, right? Where you've got different functions and different stakeholders that need to align around a common set of metrics. And I know everyone gives lip service to the common set of metrics, and then everyone sort of defaults back to, if I'm in marketing, I care about this, and if I'm in sales, I care about this, and it's yes, this. I'm curious, so like, what role does an analytics leader like yourself play in helping really align truly on those shared metrics? And then the second part of that question is, how do you do it, right? Because it's so hard, the change management and the alignment and everything else. So I'd just love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think as an analytics leader, the important job is to bring clarity in chaos. And that comes from being very transparent and keeping people honest on what the numbers are showing and what the definition is. You don't want to have 3 versions of marketing attribution. You don't want to have a unique way of doing like sales attribution as well. And I think fundamentally, I always ask myself, like, if you are a smaller company and a founder establishing or is representing the go-to-market function altogether, because founders are the best, believe it or not, even though they are not true seller personality, they are the ones who have raised the money. They know what their product is and how they want to sell it. So when a company is really small, these problems don't really occur at all, because everybody is aligned on what we are actually using, how we are approaching our customers from a marketing lens, how are we going to talk to them on a sales lens. These problems arise when you bring in like different you establish an org structure within go-to-market, and say marketing is a different function, now sales is a different function. Marketing is going to now bring in another tool that they have used in the past, and they'll use that for driving more marketing qualified leads, which will eventually like flow into our CRM, and then the sales needs to accept it to really qualify it, and then after that they act. So anywhere where a handover is happening, you need to bring people and give them like common shared incentives instead of individual goals. If a marketing team just has a goal of creating pipeline, I can run like any kind of campaign, like you can pour millions of dollars in an event and bring a lot of people, which will create marketing qualified lead. But are these effective leads? Like, you need to at least like ask these questions to marketing. It shouldn't be a question to sales that, okay, you had a pipeline of so much, like why did you actually close? And then once the sales team closes it, like from pre-sales to post-sales, that handover is also really critical, because to a customer, it doesn't really matter whether you're from marketing team or from pre-sales team or post-sales team. You're interfacing with one single product, right? And every single function should actually represent that as a team, instead of hitting their own individual goals. Unfortunately, as the companies scale up, this becomes like one of the bigger problems to get alignment across the business units. Now that can be solved through changing an org structure and building one revenue team, which I've seen that in the past, and it has at least like brought people together because now everybody reports to one single like chief revenue officer. But a lot of companies, for them, it is not practical. And there, like I think getting buy-in through transparency and figuring out what the shared objective is the approach. And it can only be solved through data. Now, there is only shared version of definitions that we have, and everybody agrees on it, so that when we use a report or a dashboard, it doesn't really matter which function you're from, what you're looking at, and what you need to do as a leader to drive improvements to this number. I think ultimately the one single metric or two single metrics I've seen like in the companies that work out really well is, one is obviously your revenue, that you need to keep the revenue going up. But within revenue, you can have a split from new versus existing customers, which defines like, okay, am I investing more on the demand gen? Am I investing more in my retention? But one metric that really shines the light on everything is the dollar-based net retention, right? Like how much you are actually retaining, how much you're growing your customers, and are you even retaining them? And that metric is kind of a great indicator for a SaaS company to see how they are doing. Great companies actually have it in north of like 130, 140%. And if you are actually like in like barely in 100%, like then there is a lot of work to be done to uncover where the problem is. Do you have more churn? Do you have more, are you signing up new customers, but are you having trouble retaining them? And if so, then bring all these three functions together to run some combined like campaigns and have them give them a shared goal of improving the DNR.
Yeah, that's such a, you said so much that I think was really important, which smaller companies typically don't have that. As you scale, you start running into more of that, but also just being true to what the core metrics are that the business cares, not the functional, but that the business cares about, and ultimately what the board and what the investors care about the most as well, right? Yep. So I want to be cognizant of time here, and so but no podcast is ever really complete unless you talk about AI. I can't go anywhere without hearing about AI. So especially in go-to-market, everybody's talking about the opportunity for AI within go-to-market. A lot of leaders, though, when they look at what the early pilots or versions of AI have done, it's maybe been underwhelming, or they don't trust what it's spit out. I'd love to get your perspective on what actually has to be true in the underlying data of the systems before AI can be useful, and where do you see most companies kind of getting ahead of themselves?
Yeah, I think having a great semantic layer along with the data quality are the two fundamental pillars for building any AI agent. Because one, we need to make sure that you have like right hygiene in your data systems, whether it is like your product usage data or product configuration information or CRM, and anything related to a customer or opportunities. You can't really build any intelligent AI system on top of on a bad data. The second piece is data oncology is actually one of the famous term like nowadays, where all the data definitions that I have, can I actually feed that into a data model and a semantic layer, so that when we are building an AI system, like we are not doing test to SQL models anymore. That's like something that was done decades ago by some famous reporting tools. But the age is different. We need to teach an AI or an LLM model like to understand which resource to query. And I had a first-hand experience in doing this as we were building the assistant. Because every single tool that we have defined, we need to give it like a little bit of context to our agent that, okay, if the question is related to this, here's a tool that you need to use. And this is I think it's a big effort to begin with for a lot of like data companies, but it's going to give amazing results like in a year or 2 years from now. So it's totally worth investing time in getting your data in the right shape and documenting it so that like agents can actually query it effectively. You can't do that in a traditional database. Just like in a traditional database, you need to make it like it is. I mean, you should be able to support in a homogeneous data source, but a heterogeneous source is the way to go. And I think Postman has a unique advantage as I see like how the product is, because Postman is one of the biggest public API network, and customers also have private APIs in Postman. And we have a product called Postman AI where I can give a simple instruction to build an application using my private API and also public API. And the only reason this thing works is because there is a spec that is defined for an API in the Postman product. Without that spec or understanding which API does what, the AI is going to be clueless. So for go-to-market systems, coming back to the question, right? I think given there are so many tool offerings that are out there in the market to help solve one piece of the puzzle, it is really important to understand what volume of data you will have to push in order to make your investment in that tool worth a while. It's important to do a POC just to see what works if you don't have the capacity to build groundwork. But it's a false belief that AI can fix everything if the house is not in order in terms of your data shape and quality.
Yeah. So last question for you before we transition over to the lightning round, which is a little more fun, lighthearted. I think historically it's been really difficult for data governance teams and data engineering teams to get better data hygiene funded, right? It's usually something that's sort of pushed. But I think with the emergence of AI and the importance of AI at the board level, my hypothesis is maybe that's gotten a little easier because they know that we can't have good outputs unless we've got good inputs. I'm curious, like when your experience, what is the best way to go to a CFO and say, look, we've got to make the investments to improve the data foundation? Because, and I guess the question, do you agree with that statement that those are the types of things that get pushed to the side? And then what recommendations do you have to really make it important to get funded?
Yeah, I think it's treated as if this is your startup idea and you are asking for investments from your investor, and CFO is one of the investors. It's always great to go with a prototype. And believe it or not, trying to boil the ocean with any AI agent is just, you're not going to succeed. You'll probably get buried by so many data quality issues and the project is blocked forever. So pick a small use case, because teaching an agent a skill is easy. You can actually pick a small use case. It can be, let's say, and a lot of companies have already solved this today, is say your public facing documentation of your content, right? Like support documentation. And you can easily train an AI model on it. That data set is actually relatively cleaner as compared to all the other internal mess the companies have. But even in that internal stuff, let's say if I have prospecting agent and all I need to provide is a high quality of MQLs with some clear set of guidelines on this is based on this title. You need to create this pitch in terms of email with some additional information. This is a very simple use case. You can actually ship it out within a week. Once you have it, present it to your CFO, talk about how this can actually scale and what are areas you want to solve. Building one agent to solve everything is also not going to work. So you will have to build multiple agents. I think it's no different than any sort of automation that people did by writing scripts in the past. So it's also important to understand, are you actually writing an agent or you're creating a script to automate something? But the investment will follow if there is a proof that this thing actually works and it's saving time. Yeah, there is a blind investment at the moment in a lot of companies, but I haven't seen cases where some of the projects are dead-end projects. Churn prediction model, a lot of companies invest in that, and they never finish building that model, or the model is not really doing its job to predict churn. Yeah. But the real engagement where you're actually talking to the customer, that's when you can sense what the sentiment is, versus trying to train a model to predict churn, which requires so many inputs to understand where this customer is going. Yeah.
Great. Let's move to the lightning round, and we are running tight on time, so I'm going to be selective and ask you maybe two or three. First answer that kind of comes to the top of your head: what's the one go-to-market metric that most teams obsess over that matters less than they actually think?
I think it's the ARR. ARR, while it's a great pre-sales metric, you need to also make sure that you're talking about revenue recognition too. If you have signed a contract, are we actually collecting revenue from it? Or it's really important to tie those two, and you need to make sure the gap is not wider in those.
What's the one signal that revenue teams under instrument today?
Not really understanding the cancellation, why customers are actually dropping out of the funnel, and what needs to be done to prevent that from happening versus just accepting that this is what the state is.
Yep. What's the one thing every CRO should ask their analytics team for, but rarely does?
Did we meet our forecast? And if we didn't, why didn't we did? Right.
Yeah. But last rapid fire. What's harder, fixing bad data or changing behavior?
Changing behavior.
Why is that?
I think you can write a script to do all of the data fixes on anomaly detection and everything, but unless you build a discipline in an organization to really like follow some of the steps, you're still at the mercy of like people to produce this data, and if they are actually just picking shortcuts, which is what humans are more inclined towards, then you're still getting incorrect information. So changing behavior, I think, should be compensated in a way where there is a component like that gets people excited about their operation excellence. Otherwise, there is no incentive for people to do things right.
Yeah. Well, change in any aspect is hard, right? I think you hit it on the head. You've got to align the incentive towards the outcome or the behavior that you want. What's the favorite part of your job?
I think answering questions that nobody asking, the questions that people are not really asking, because I really did. Most of the times, like revenue unblock is not an obvious problem. It is a blind spot, and helping teams see that blind spot is what like really make my job fulfilling.
Yeah, seeing around corners.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's always gonna be the flip side to that question. What's the least favorite part of your job?
I think transactional data requests that don't really lead to any strategic outcome. It's just like I'd rather write an agent or a script to respond to that, because if there is no value that I'm getting or the other side is getting.
Yeah. Okay, last question. This is more personal. When you're not working, what do you like to do to decompress or sort of get away from it all?
I like to paint.
Do you?
So it's a hobby. Yeah. I like to paint. I get lost while working on a painting for hours. And that's the best way for me to decompress. And when I'm not, I also like go out and walk without using any headphones, because I like to observe things like what's happening around me as I walk. And that's a great way to also touch some grass, basically, in terms of Gen Z.
What types of things do you paint? Do you kind of go in open-minded, or do you sort of have a certain type of form?
Open-minded mostly. I do like try to take reference from historical pieces as well as reinvent based on like my own imagination.
Yeah, I love that. Well, we are right at time. This has been just an absolutely fabulous conversation. I could probably go another hour with you, but we don't have that type of time. But I just want to say thank you. Thank you for sharing your insights, your wisdom. I think the audience will get a lot of value from it. That's another episode of the Revenue Lounge. Uday, thank you very much. And we'll talk to our listeners soon. Thank you.
Thank you. This was exciting. Thank you for having me here, Randy. Have a good one.
All right, you as well.